Hello everyone, my name is Chalon Clark. I am a partner at Husch Blackwell practicing commercial litigation. Thank you so much to Husch Blackwell for sponsoring the recording of this interview. Thank you to Aaron Tobin for coming up with this amazing program. And thank you to President Chrissy Castle for continuing the program. I am here to interview a lady who needs absolutely no introduction. Chief Justice Wright, how are you today?
Thank you so much. I am well, Chalon, and it is great to see you.
Yes, same here. So I want to start off this interview with a confession. You always have the sparkler for many, many years, run by the Dallas Black Women Attorneys Association at your home.
That's correct.
And the first time that I went
for about 25 years, I believe.
I went in 2012, and I enjoyed the love, the support, the wisdom that came from you, and I thought, I have to know this lady. And so I volunteered to be the chair of dabwa for 2 years in a row, just so I could get to the sparkler and meet you.
Oh, well, now, I will tell, now that's very interesting. I will tell you that I didn't know that, but you did such a fabulous job.
Thank you.
I asked someone, can we make her permanent chair? And then maybe she could train some of the others. But I guess the tradition was that there was a new chair each year. And, but you are such an excellent, excellent hostess.
Thank you so much.
It was a beautiful, each time you did it, it was just an incredible
Thank you.
And creative event.
It was really, really so fun. And I'm just happy to be here for a full circle moment to be interviewing you one-on-one during Black History Month. And I'm just so excited to interview you. You're a living legend, and you're so many firsts that I don't even want to go through line by line. We'd be here forever. So I thought we'd integrate all of your firsts throughout the interview. So I want to get started and start with your childhood. So your father was in the military. You spent part of middle school and 2 years of high school in Japan. What was that like growing up in Japan?
Well, I loved it. It presented a very, very diverse culture. I loved the people. I loved many of the traditions. I loved the courtesy, the society that was so polite. And it was just an opportunity to grow up, and it was a protected environment, but it was also just fun and interesting, and there was always something exciting to do, traveling. And it was so safe. It felt so safe as long as I was in by dark. My father didn't have any objection to me riding the train, and we would ride the train to different parts of Japan. And it was at a time when the Japanese farmers would also put their goats and chickens on the train. So we would have to share space with some of the farm animals. But it was a very interesting experience.
You talked about it being a protected environment. You were not only physically protected, but you were also mentally protected from the racism that was going on in the United States. And your dad decided at some point that you needed to go back to the States and learn what it was like to be Black in America. What led to that decision, and how did you feel about it at the time?
Well, I'll start with how I felt about it. I was furious with him because I wanted to graduate, and all he had to do was ask for an extension. So, and I felt like I was being punished because what he said was that you are confused and you don't know what it is to be Black in America. And I've got to take you back to America. Now, at this time, things are changing, and you need to know how people have sacrificed for your freedom as a Black person. What you've seen is me put my life on the line, and for you all to make sacrifices for the freedoms of all Americans. But you don't understand that it's different when you get back home and you are an American. Mm-hmm. And when I've been out here fighting wars, and I have to tell you, I'm very, very proud of my father's military service. He's a decorated war hero. He served in Korea. He served World War II. He served 2 tours in Vietnam. He's highly decorated, Bronze Star recipient. So I'm very proud of his military service, and the fact that he suggested that he had been fighting for all of America, but there was a different fight that was taking place in America for my rights as a Black person. I really didn't understand what he was talking about.
I really felt like your dad was genius in that timing, because when you experience racism as a young child, as I did, it totally affects your self-esteem. It rips at the fabric of who you are. And I think the fact that he had you away, not experiencing that as you were coming through your formative years, but then deciding when it was time to face reality, his timing was so genius.
And it's amazing because that's exactly what he said about why he took us out of the country, that he did not want us to grow up as he had grown up. Either fearing or hating anyone because they had abused me. And so he said he wanted me to be in an environment where, as he always told me, he would say, nobody is better than you. They're just people who will work harder than you. But if you are willing to put in the work, you can do anything you want to do. And, you know, so he put that competitive spirit in my soul from a child. It wasn't about Black or white. It was simply about the fact that, you know, it was about my own humanity. And it was about my own abilities. So
that's amazing.
He did a good job in that regard.
Obviously.
But it was tough. I can tell you that the return to the United States was very, very painful. It was a great struggle, and I had a very difficult time.
Yeah, I want to get to one event in particular, but I want to talk about how you did go back. You did request to go to the majority Black high school. So how was it? How was the good part of being back in?
Well, unfortunately, I told my father that, you know, since I was being forced to come back against my will, and part of this was, of course, I was a lawyer. I've been a lawyer, I think, well before I went to law school. I had to be with my dad. I told him that since I was coming back to be Black in America, that I wanted to go to the high school, to the segregated high school, to the Black high school. And my parents purchased a restaurant downtown. It was near the school. And at first he said, no, I don't think that's going to be a good idea. But I said, well, you know, why am I back if I'm going to be at the military school? And it's going to be just like it was when I was in Japan.
Right.
So I convinced him. That lasted 2 weeks.
2 weeks?
2 weeks.
And what happened?
Well, the teachers were intrigued by the fact that I had lived in Japan And we talked about Japanese culture, and they asked me how it was, and I told them, and they said, that's great. We think that that should be shared with the other students. And would you like to have a class? And I said, oh, sure.
Teach a class.
Teach a class, sure. I said, yeah, I'll teach a class in Japanese culture and flower arranging and jujitsu and so they set me up in a room, but we never knew when. So it was about once a week, and my father, one of those days, well, I was only there 2 weeks, but on the one day that I was teaching, my father called because we had mandatory vaccinations going in and out of the country, and I had to go to the base to get all of my vaccinations because we were back in the country. So someone told him that they weren't sure where I was, and he was berserk. He was, what do you mean you aren't sure? That's where I left her. How did she leave without my permission? They said, oh, no. It's not like that. She's teaching a class. Well, I'm not going to repeat what he said, but he told them to have me packed up, and he would pick up my things and to check me out, and he was going to take me out to the military school where people spoke 4 and 5 different languages, and no one was going to be impressed with my limited knowledge of Japanese culture.
That is so funny. Your dad sounds amazing, just stern and funny all at the same time.
I didn't always think he was funny at the time. We have laughed about many things since then. Yes.
So turning back to the more serious part of being back, you did talk about how difficult it was. There was one particular incident that really impacted you deeply, dealing with racism in America. What was that? Can you tell us about it?
That was also right after I came back, and I'd been shipped back to the military school, which was near where we lived. And however, my parents had a restaurant in downtown Dover, Delaware. It was 2 blocks away from another restaurant. I was having some friends to come in. They were also, their parents were being shipped back to the States. And so we were going to meet up. They said they came into Dover and we got a date and time. And I said, I'll set up lunch. I said, my parents have a restaurant, but we're not going there. There's one about 2 blocks down the street, and we'll meet there. And that's what we did. We met at this restaurant, and we were so happy to see each other. All of my friends were Anglo, all of those. None of my Japanese friends had returned. But these were all some of my Anglo friends. And we were sitting at the table, and we were just so engrossed in our conversation. I guess it had been about an hour that we'd been talking. And I suddenly realized that no one had come over and taken our order. And since I was the hostess, I raised my hand and said, oh, I'm so sorry. We've been occupying your table all this time, and we haven't placed an order. And the young lady said to me, well, I can take your order, she said, but there's just one problem. When I bring their food, I will need for you to eat in the kitchen. I was like, what? And of course, this erupted. We were like, what are you talking about? And I said, my parents own a restaurant 2 blocks down the street. I don't eat in the kitchen in my parents' restaurant. What are you talking about? And she said, I'm very sorry, but we just can't serve you. Well, I was like, oh, this is what my father was talking about. Are we serious right now? Well, we all broke into tears. It was, as a matter of fact, this is the first time that I have not broken into tears when I have told this story.
Well, I got some for you.
Because it has, I have lived with this for now, well over 50 years. And it was so painful for me at the time. I could not believe what I was hearing, that she was actually, that this was actually happening. But neither could my friends. But then as we huddled outside of the restaurant crying, and by then we didn't want to go down to my parents' restaurant, it was just a sad party. And somehow it felt like we would just forever be changed as a result of this incident. And they were screaming, you know, this goes on in Mississippi or Alabama or something. We don't believe that this is Delaware. And so it suddenly became real to me that this fight wasn't just taking place in the South. It was also taking place on the East Coast and all over America. And I went down back to my parents and I told my mom, I need to see Daddy. And so she said, well, he's at work. He's at the, he's at the base, but go home and I'll tell him. And I was all upset. And she said, are you all right? And I said, something bad happened. And so my dad met me at the house and I told him what happened. And of course I got chastised about why was I spending his money at somebody else's establishment when I should have been spending his money in his restaurant. And so I got a lecture on that. And then, he said, that's what I'm talking about. That's what I was talking about. And you're not accustomed to it. And you are all upset. And, you're brokenhearted. But this may be the first time, but it's not going to be the last time. And I've got to get you accustomed to how to handle this. And I didn't feel that I would ever get accustomed to it. But he called the president of the NAACP chapter, local chapter. In a month's time, the restaurant was integrated, because military establishments, whenever you're close to a military establishment and you have African American, not just African American, but all nationalities of service people. The bases want to be certain that when they go into the neighborhoods that they are not faced with discrimination, because they don't have the discrimination on the base. They don't want their service people to feel like they're fighting for the country, and then they can't go.
As soon as they step off the base.
As soon as they step off the base, they're going to be mistreated by the very people
they're fighting for.
Yes. So at any rate, they hired an African-American chef, and the place was integrated. I was invited to come back, but in all of these years, I have never gone back to that restaurant because the experience was just too painful.
Yes, definitely understood. But again, an amazing example your father was, how he used his stature and his influence to change things for everyone else. And you did the same. You opened doors for so many during even times that were painful for you. So you did have a good time in high school. You became the first African American state rep for Delaware, right? And
For Girls State.
yes, for Girls State.
Yes, I was selected by the base. I didn't realize when I went. You have to also understand now that I had never been really exposed to American politics. So my dad voted absentee while we were away from the country, and I knew about the president and about national officers, but I didn't really know about local elected officials, etc. But at Girls State, that was something that was taught about all of the state officials, and we learned. And the interesting thing was I was selected by the girls. There were no African Americans at Girls State other than me. I thought that was odd because this was a statewide event, and I thought that there would be representatives from the African American schools. And my military school had selected me, and they could not decline me. But other African American students in the state of Delaware, women, were not allowed to come.
Wow.
And it was not integrated until after I was there. But the girls themselves selected me. They decided that I was a great debater, and they said, "We think you should run for Attorney General." I was like, who is the Attorney General? What does the Attorney General do? I don't know anything about a campaign. They made posters, they did. And so I learned about campaigns at Girls State. And it is very interesting that they say life imitates art.
Yes.
It's very interesting that experience later replicated itself in my adult life.
Many campaigns.
Many campaigns. Many campaigns.
So you went on to college at Strayer University, and you were a first once again because you integrated that school and the dorm.
Now, one thing you have to understand is my integration of places was very unintentional. I was always walking into somewhere because I expected that if I was
Qualified.
polite, qualified, well-dressed, well-spoken, I expected that I couldn't imagine why anyone would exclude me. So I never, if I can, this isn't a sense of arrogance, but I never thought that there was anywhere that I didn't belong. And so, because I told you, my father told me there was no one better than me. And that, I just had to, there were certain, I had to be principled, I had to be, there were ethical, I had to be honest. Those were the standards. My character was what was at issue. But other than that, I never, it didn't dawn on me that I wouldn't be accepted.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that goes back to the protection that he had for you when he kept you in Japan during those formative years.
Right.
And you applied, didn't send your picture.
I applied, I couldn't find a picture. My father was pressing me, college was upon me. The military, as wonderful as the schools were, they were not prepared. They couldn't adequately prepare African American students to go into civilian life. So I didn't even know. There were colleges that wouldn't accept me. I didn't even know that. So they were not really prepared to give me information and to give me direction. My father was pressing me about colleges. I really wanted a year off. I really wanted to see what I was faced with. And he wasn't willing to do that. So I said, I've got to go somewhere. So I chose Strayer, and he said to me, I'm not paying for that. And he had some other choices in mind, but to me, it was highly rated as a business college. I had been a business major in high school. I thought, I will go there. I'll find my way. I got to Strayer when he took me there. I received a notice that I was assigned to a dorm. I had a roommate, and there was a date for us to come and register. I got there, everyone just, a state of confusion. They were scuttling about, and all of a sudden, something had happened. Oh, they couldn't find my registration. Oh, they could. Oh, yes, they could, but they could. It was mass confusion. And of course, my father was furious. He was furious because I think what he really wanted was me to go to Spelman or Fisk or Howard. He wanted me to have that experience, and from there, he would, he wanted me to have that college experience first. He really felt that there was a need for that. And I just wanted to get my feet wet. And then I found myself in another situation where they had never accepted a full-time black student. They didn't have a black student, never had a black student in the dorm. And what to do. So they did have an overflow, but I was not an overflow. An overflow was on Connecticut Avenue on Embassy Row, in a small hotel, and we had a dorm mother. Now, my father was insistent on that because he was not going to leave me in DC without supervision. But they convinced him that there was a dorm mother and everything was the same. I was closer to the school because the dorm was actually in Arlington. We were really in walking distance of the school from Connecticut Avenue. And it turned out, yes, that I integrated Strayer's day program and their dorm.
Wow.
Quite unexpectedly.
Yes.
But yes.
That's amazing.
Very unintentional.
So you started your career off as a paralegal, and one of your jobs was at the Citizen Crusade Against Poverty, where you met the likes of Stokely Carmichael, Vernon Jordan, Fannie Lou Hamer. How did you participate in the civil rights movement? And
Marion Barry, Rap Brown, Ed and Rap Brown, and a host of people, my good friends, Bayard Rustin, and Sandra, and Bill Raspberry, who was a longtime columnist for the Washington Post. It was funded by the United Auto Workers, and it was designed, I guess, kind of as a watchdog agency over the poverty program. Their position was that the money was going to, grants were going out to people really that they were not getting to the grassroots level. Let me put it that way. people who, majority Anglo lawyers and organizations were getting the bulk of the grant money from the poverty program, and the people that the money was supposed to get to was not getting there. It was many of the civil rights groups they met and they relied on this organization to make sure that the grant money and all of the government money was properly dispersed. So I was involved in numerous conferences, grant writing, and all of that at the organization. It was very interesting job. It was, and I met a lot of it. It put me in a position to be a bridge builder after that time, because people were pretty angry. There were a lot of people who followed Dr. King, but a lot of younger people in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee were saying that these marches, we're getting beaten down in these marches. And they were being frustrated. They were very frustrated with Dr. King's marches, because he was teaching the people to be passive, and they had to, even though they were being beaten, they had to take the beating. They could never ever retaliate, so it was an interesting. It was an interesting time, because now you had a break from Dr. King, where people were very angry, the younger students, and saying, no, this is not right. And then, of course, you had the Black Panther Party that was saying, if there's a right to bear arms, then we have a right to bear arms in order to protect ourselves. So I was watching a revolution going on right in America.
Did you feel like you were part of that?
I really was having a very hard time with all of this, because people were so divided. This was all very confusing to me. But I will tell you this, because of the fact that my father was in the military, I knew that I wasn't wired to be beaten in the street. I knew that. I was not wired for that. And I also knew that it was not going to please my family for me to be jailed. And so I had to make a decision, even though I was angry and frustrated. I've got to make a choice about working within the system to make the system work for people and make the system work for me. So I can't allow myself. And so I eventually started working. I stayed there about a year, less than a year, about 9 months. And then I went into the government, and I worked for the government. And at that point, that's when I said, okay, these very people that are, who need access to grants, who need access to information, I can help them in this way. I can be a bridge builder. But no, I have marched, but I have never been arrested, and I've never been beaten.
Well, yeah, I don't think it takes that to be part of it. It sounds like you were just right in the center, and you just talked about working within the system. So did you consider like you becoming a lawyer part of that journey to be the one to work?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
When I was licensed as a lawyer, that was the happiest day of my life at
Me
that
too.
point. That was the happy. There's a certain freedom.
Yes.
I felt like now I am empowered to really do something to help other people. I'm really in a position now
Yes.
to help people in ways that have been very important to me. Fairness and justice and equality, those things were always important to me. And while I, got a great deal of experience working in the government, being a lawyer was somehow, and I didn't want to be a government lawyer. So I wasn't sure where it was going to take me, but I knew that I wanted to actually practice law.
Yes.
I wanted to litigate. But I will also tell you that I was still very tied to the business side and very tied to the international side. So my actual degree was always in business litigation and international litigation.
Yes. So you graduated from Howard University. You ended up in Dallas as a solo practitioner, practicing law, making the difference you talked about. And then you became a judge. So from 1983 to 1986, you were an associate judge, and you were the first African American appointed as an associate judge in Dallas County. And there were going to be many more appointments to follow after that. What did you do to make the kind of connections that brought you to the top of the list when these types of positions became available?
First of all, you start helping other people. Judge Berlin Brashear was the only Black judge to win an election in '82, and I was in, Judge Larry Baraka and I convinced him that he should run, and we urged him to switch parties because all of the judges were switching parties. To run, and I told him I would actively campaign for him and go out and help raise money. I was a lawyer at the time. So I got to know all of the judges and many of the lawyers simply by helping someone else.
Yes.
And I think oftentimes we rush to the front of the line and without going through a process.
Right.
And I've never believed in that. I believe that you ought to first, you need some experience.
Right. And pay your dues.
And yes, to somebody else. So yeah, I did. I worked on other people's campaigns and helped to raise money. I met all of the judges. He wasn't the only one, but he is the one that I worked the hardest for because he was the only African American judge left on the bench.
Wow. And so from there, from 86 to 95, you became a district judge. And then you were the first African American woman to be elected to district court in Dallas County. Wow. And you talked about the judges switching parties. You ran as a Republican. What are your thoughts today on politics and the judiciary?
Oh, I absolutely think it has no place. I think that if you look at judicial ethics, the code of judicial conduct, I think you'll find that once you get on that bench, you dare not allow your political positions to come up in your opinions. I think that absolutely it plays no part. it plays a part in your getting there. That's how you get to the bench. In Texas, in other places, it's different. It's by appointment. I've studied all the different ways of getting to the bench. There are flaws in all of them. But once you get to that bench, all of those connections that helped you to get there, you have to let them know.
Right.
That cannot impact your decision as a judge.
Yes. I wanted to talk about one very interesting thing. Hopefully we could talk about it quickly. Today we think of mediation as routine, but you were a pioneer of mediation, the first one to require mandatory mediation in your courtroom, and people weren't happy about it. Can you tell us about that?
No, they were not. There was a specific reason why I made it mandatory, and that was because my first court was a family court. And what the judicial process did, what the litigation process did to children was unconscionable. And I absolutely did not want to be a part of that. And I said that this is going to improve. Something has to be done about this. And I found, I ended up I was invited to be on the State Justice Institute. It was a study, and first, and it was part of Harvard and the State Justice Institute to develop standards for mediation, which included all of the confidentiality issues, how it should be separated from the court, etc. And I decided that I was going to make it mandatory in my court for all cases involving custody. That's your first step in my court. Call it mandatory, call it what you want, but that's the first step in my court.
Yes.
The lawyer said I had implemented the lawyer's unemployment rule. They got up at the family law conference that year, declared that I was going to be a one-term judge. Oh my goodness, it was such. After that, every lawyer became a mediator. Mediation is as
Par for the
commonplace.
course, yes.
My goodness, but the ruckus it caused, it caused quite a ruckus, but it made a difference in the lives of the children that appeared before my court.
Yes, that's amazing. So what most people probably know you for is being on the Fifth Court of Appeals. You were appointed by President Bush, then you were elected in 1996, and then you became the first African American to be elected in a multi-county election for any elective office in Texas. What was the most difficult part of your job as a justice?
I loved the Court of Appeals. It was an opportunity once again to collaborate with other justices. So, but also, I guess the hardest part of the job is once you read the law and you interpret it, you have to get at least one other justice. Normally the panels are panels of three. At our state court of appeals, courts of appeal, you have a panel of three. You rarely sit en banc, but if you're sitting en banc, you need a majority. But a majority for your panel is two. So I guess the hardest part was being prepared, being able to convince at least one other justice
Yes.
that your interpretation was correct.
Well, you already had a lot of experience in convincing people with your dad, so you started out the womb with that one. So you ended your career as the Chief Justice, appointed first by Governor Perry, and then you became the first African American to become Chief Justice on any intermediate appellate court in Texas. My question for you was just how were you able to navigate in a world that with people that didn't look like you? Was becoming your authentic self and being your authentic self at work, was it a process for you, or is this something that you were kind of born with because of all of the parameters and the safety your father had placed around you?
You have to understand that we moved about every 18 months. That meant that I had to bloom where I was planted and when I was planted. I always was in a position, I guess, where I had to, I discovered very early that everyone who looks like you is not your friend, and everyone who looks different from you is not your enemy.
Yes.
Okay? So I had to judge people based upon their character. And that's the way, when I walk into a room, when I walk into a situation, I'm looking for team building. I'm trying to find my allies. And I don't care what color they are. I'm looking for allies. And that's the way I have, so being my authentic self, that was me.
What was the most difficult time for you in your career?
I guess the most difficult time in my career was private practice, I'd have to say.
Really?
Yes. Private practice is very, I would not encourage that for young lawyers. I'd urge them to go in and work with someone else. It can be very dangerous. Don't jeopardize your license. You need mentors. You need advisors. You need to surround yourself with good friends and good mentors who are lawyers. Certainly, there's room for other family and friends, but you really need some close lawyers and friends. It is not, there are deadlines. There's so many things that can cause you problems, cause you ethical problems with your clients.
Yes.
I felt safe in doing it simply because of the fact that I had already, I had worked in the government. I had an extensive administrative background, business background, and I was comfortable in doing it. But even for me, it was hard. And that was the most difficult.
You did just touch on mentorship. Justice Linda Thomas was one of your great mentors. Are there any other mentors you want to talk about?
And I could never forget Dr. James Jones. Dr. James Jones in Washington, D.C., in the mayor's office. Dr. Jones was the person who identified very early on when I was working for him as a secretary paralegal, who said to me, "You are much too smart to be a secretary the rest of your life." And although I had not intended to be, I was making money. I was making more money than most people who had graduated from college. And it was very hard. I was going to school part-time. And then Dr. Jones gave me a deadline and said, you have to be in law school by this date, or you're not going to have a job. I am no longer going to allow you to work with me full-time and not be in law school.
That's amazing. Sometimes you need people in your life to give you that push.
You really do.
I want to kind of start to talk about reflection on this storied career you've had. What failure taught you the biggest life lesson?
Fortunately, I think my biggest failure was in my childhood, and it provided one of my greatest life lessons. My sister, who's 2 years younger, Pat, and I were we were supposed to be preparing for Easter speeches, and I think for about 4 weeks, about a month before the Easter program, we were supposed to practice
I remember
speeches.
that.
And I was 10, I was about 10, and I had a very long soliloquy. And she had a little shorter one because she was 8. And but then we decided, as she told me, she said, well, we don't really have to go to practice because we can learn this on our own. And we can go over to our cousins. So instead of us going to the church to practice Easter speeches, we went over and played at our cousin's house. Well, the night before the speech was ready, we were supposed to give the speech. She says, okay, now we read through them, and she read mine and told me to practice mine. And so I got started, and the speech is long. And I couldn't get it. She tried it a couple of times, and then she could say the speech. I couldn't remember the speech. And she said, what's wrong? Why can't you remember it? Well, long story short, finally, I got it. But the next day, when we got to church, and I got up and looked out at my mom, and I got ready to say this long soliloquy, I looked, and all of a sudden, I felt very guilty. And I was feeling very nervous because she and I had worked all night. And I got up there, and I looked out at my mom, and I had a panic attack. Mm-hmm. I couldn't remember the speech. So I sat down and I said, excuse me, call me next. And then I got up a second time, and Pat was looking panicked. She was trying to whisper to me. I looked at my mom, and I forgot again.
Oh, no.
And I sat down. But the third time, I finally got up, and I finished the speech. Well, that I was in big trouble. But what I learned from it was that Pat actually had a photographic memory.
Oh.
And so you have to learn that someone else's preparation time might not be yours.
Right.
And you had better work on your own preparation and on your own preparation time. And that is something I learned at 10.
Yes, and I know that carried you through.
And she was gifted with a photographic memory, and I am not.
Yes. That's so much a lesson in comparing yourself to others as well.
Exactly, and as my father said, you can do anything, but if you're willing to put the work in, sometimes you have to put in a little more work than your neighbor.
Yes, another good lesson from your father. So you shared with me a mantra, and I consider myself pretty well versed in the Bible verses, but this is one that I had not heard before. And it's one you consider your mantra: whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, do it with thy might. For there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave whither thou goest. That's Ecclesiastes 9:10, and that's hard hitting right there. What does it mean to you? Why is this your life mantra?
It is not only my mantra, it is my covenant with God. I believe that it describes a purpose-filled life. Whatever it is that you're given, you need to work at it, you need to work hard at it, you need to have a strong work ethic, and be proud. Make it something you could be proud of.
Yes.
Because life is short. And when we die,
That's it.
that's it. Your purpose in life is during your life, not after your life.
Yes, I love that. I love that. So as we close, and here we are sitting here in Black History Month, do you consider yourself a part of Black history? Do you consider
Well-
yourself a living legend? And what does that mean to you?
Well, when I started my career, I certainly didn't plan to be part of history. I certainly didn't think that I was old enough to be history. But as I reflect on the growth in Dallas, as I reflect on the growth in the minority community, the diversity that is now on the bench in Dallas,
Yes.
it seems like a very, very long time ago. And I guess it is history. And if history remembers anything about me, I hope it remembers that I gave you the very best of my service. And it was my honor.
Absolutely. What a great way to end this interview. Thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure.
Thank you.